Bodhichitta Timba, Tamjichimba, Teva, Sona, Linjatuja, Sevichula, Totalo, Lopato Jadavi, giving it on a dojo, Chito, Chojurba, Jajula, Totalo, Toledo, Lavata, Nishakanama, Yondeja, Genula, Samsa, Dojija, Rota, Mela Jagabo. Pamata Jawan Hongbo, Julomono, the Omi Chijin, Japan, the Otto, Rasim Chukan Kosoto, the Belsa, Ramija Raso, the Totoka, Chujin, Yasome Bojo, Raso, the Dajin, Tapa Chujin, and the they should all the Batang. Not on this Tonta Sancho simply. Took the shoe or it. Then the Roman Yumba Manchuke, just a call your then you almost up a side down Tamjiki. I did a call couple, it did that, settle the Musu Gombe and Yanselin down. Then he took the show in there. Then he Gombe Yanselin down, Yanselin that hanging. Territory control of Mona and Jiki, the Rang Sem did it. The same in the Saji Janamji and the same Nani, the Sanchok Sem Namani, the Katakot Sanchok Sem Devatera. That's the same day. Dandy and Jenny says a letter new of a same no one did shut up a chardy or a. Tritona Sanchok Sem reading a can't. Don't Sancho sent the children, Chotang, you charge, same day, Yang, sent the Dama Charson. There is a Tom Sancho same day. When the children, the Chotang Matan, things from Megan Lona Chocolate. The new donor that Yamson Matamji, Sancho sent number needs. Sancho sent number needs, any Gonto Sancho sent the Tobacco Charson dinner. That Dajin is the Dajin Kicha song. There is a jet lamb in the song. The Lalis of Women is one. Dopo Sanji, Yipin Semi Tongs. Kangri, Yipin Lord the Gina, then he died on my pass on my child over it. Simple part chap that children over it. When Charles Johnny Charlie Chapping was there, Yipin, simple part over it in horror. The game is Daddy, the Chakram to Chan over. Did you need on the Hakona? This is Haji Kakayom, Saji and the same did same the Tani Kiva, same with Amati Saji, Numas Tani, you must see Chadi. The head of God, the Chan. Don't Yamichi was the same Tani Kiva. The Rico Chat for it.
So this morning, Madame friends, I have explained little the meaning of the ultimate Bodhichitta, and most of the senior disciples understand that quite well. But for some completely new disciples, that is a bit more difficult to understand. So therefore, this afternoon I'm going to explain a bit more about how to actually engage in practice, meditation practice, how to put that into practice. So there's a Mantabhadra prayer, first of all, explains that there is a single basis, and that single basis is one's own mind. And that mind itself primordially has the nature of the Buddha. So what needs to be practiced is the twofold bodhicitta. Yesterday we have mentioned the relative bodhicitta, and so we have said that for as long as the mind grasps at a self and there are afflictions and karmas in the mind becomes like polluted water. And when we realize the ultimate bodhicitta, that is when that water has become completely purified. So it's still the same mind actually, just it has become completely purified at this point. For example, when water becomes completely purified, it becomes so pure you can even use it as like eye drops poured into your eyes. So what is to be practiced in order to purify the mind is the twofold bodhicitta. And we have mentioned that in the context of the relative bodhicitta, what is it that defiles or pollutes the mind? It is the grasping at a self, the dualistic grasping. So it is said there is a single basis, but there are two paths and two fruitions. Or the 37 practices say, the perfect Buddhas arise from the altruistic mind. When an altruistic mind arises, then there is no self, and the mind becomes pure and vast. For example, when ice melts, it becomes pervasive, it pervades the water. So likewise, when altruism arises, then that mind extends and goes outward, pervades. And then it says also, all suffering without exception comes from wishing for one's own happiness. So that is when we grasp at a self, the mind becomes like ice. And so if we understand these two lines, we understand that the Buddha is actually not anywhere separate from us, but is our own mind. The complete purified state of mind, the pure state of mind, that is the Buddha. And the polluted state of mind is the mind of sentient being. So that is what we need to understand. And when it comes to practice, the point of engaging in practice is in order to purify that mind, bring it to its refined or purified state.
Nangbaga team to Churuk Nabba, Deb Lottery, that's a hard cause the Tamchi, no Karasambu. Oh, Saloon Jiki Namchi, Simki Tamchi, Milan Duzir, Tajichite, Tamiba, Mataba, Toba Jiri, Halam, Tamarizam, your Mari. Kashi, the Chini Mago, Bato, oh, you are the Tomba Jiri. 고 마타바를 캠타 고를 뭐 소소를 보존들이 잘 오, 네 동반이든 가리지는 동반이 사람들이 로샤기 요리 들이 잔이 오는데 제 삼절 때서 뭐 또기나 다들 문이리서 내가 이기게 되니 가자 아 다들이 배차를 예로 만용을 때도 별로 남는 땅 거지 라고.
And so basically there's three types of individuals. There's some who have a tendency to like to read books and scriptures. They read all sorts of Buddhist and other scriptures and various texts. And so then on the basis of that they have they develop a vague trust into when they hear that the outer universe and the inner sentient beings are all compounds and so on. When they hear that, then they have a somewhat of an understanding. But so then when we say that everything is impermanent, therefore empty, then there are some who have an approximate, a vague understanding. But not completely. And then there's also those who have not really, for whom it is difficult to understand when they hear that the universe and all sentient beings are empty. It is hard for them to understand, and it also appears a bit strange to them when they hear that. Even also myself, when I was young, I was one of them. I was really wondering how come that all of this is actually empty. And so then there is those who require a little introduction and who do not read a lot of text and who just trust that this is how it really is. So if you are one of those, the third kind, could you please raise your hand? Not many.
대토절로는 팽그리 제 시대오나 나와 샘서 타게 샘니 동벌 타게 되나 하람 고아차 거라 그 따와니 마시는 선홍직디나 비생 무시다 통로 로트타만 보고 거래 다 저번에나 들때는 무슨 일인데 무슨 말이 이상이 람나 고토고 말이 대고 마탑을 가리 샘도 땅마존나 당고 덴바리 삼지 디디 삼아식나 진짜 매화도 동고래 그래서 덴바마다 사람이 동토고 그래 당고 대회를 때 덴바 매발 동지지 무보 덴바 매발에서 덴바 매발 땅 잡아야 되는 무보 덴바 매발 진짜 매발이야 좀 따버려야지 대회를 다 설흥직딩에서 잡은 것은 다음에 사강체 보는 내가 뭐래서 말이 너 토로 고마래들이 사강 먹고 토로 그래 남그 까만 남는 데는 까마라 톡다 토로 토로 탈라리 저대지 공부를 사고도 총총적 설리는 아니 저쪽 퍼져로 요말 때도 저대지 공부를 성질이 자자장 토로 그래 발전 잡을 작합 탐지 촉과 가잖아 토고서 뭐 돈으로 살아 드림은 거요 한다발 작합 탐지 야 빼서 강 딸땅들이 다 사강 때문에 뭐 말했지 독단 토로로 해서는 다 주들 내말 진짜서 매화도 차오르 선 양양도 차오르 내말 되면 혹사 선웅적이 되다가 상고래지 진짜 저듯이 뭐 토로가 돼 이렇게 어떻게 뭐를 해서는 설마 샬라 선 루루지 차안 거래지
So if you understand this, then so the way you understand it, you can easily understand then how it is that all appearances are the mind, and then how the mind actually itself is emptiness. And so then we can gain an understanding here. But so that for others might be difficult to understand, because, for instance, looking at the outer universe, the world, this world has been here for so many millions of years, and we actually see this world. So if you tell them that it is not real, it will be hard for them to understand. But then, so when we purify our mind, what first must be purified is this holding to be true, this grasping at this substantial, this concrete reality. So first we must purify the grasping at the reality, so we come to a point of knowing that it doesn't really exist. So when we come to that point, then one might wonder, does it really not exist, or have we just destroyed its existence? And so it actually really does not exist that way. It is empty, like an illusion. We only perceive this outer universe to be real for as long as it still remains. But actually, all the time there are planets and stars. Each and every day and night there are planets and stars that collide and then collapse, and then they turn into ashes. And that is the same nature as when you pick up like a heap of dirt on your hand and you blow on it, it becomes dust and just disperses. And that is really the truth of our world, of this planet, for example. For sure, one day it will come to an end, it will disperse. Or even before that, nowadays so many countries have really really weapons of mass destruction, like atomic bombs and so on. They could destroy the world in any moment, actually. But in any case, in whichever way, this world will in the end disperse. So when you're grasping at this concrete reality, somewhat diminishes, and as it diminishes, your mind becomes much lighter. So this is how you should contemplate on the outer universe. When this fixation that it is real diminishes, the mind is placed in a state of ease.
내가 선호직딩 됐다 장매 봐 요장 이 선호직딩 같이 망나양 철배잖아. 랑 남주 심지 가다 적을 류라 용왕가 창거요. 선홍직들이 용왕가 창거요래. 배는 남주 심지 그 심지를 빼내양. 근데 선홍직들이 용왕가 차창적으로 남주 심지 적을 류라 양 창거요래. 사다로 바사 타다 저 도매 워롱 샘 남카 이들 차창무요래 용왕을 아주 어떻게 남주 집이 가려서 노도 차운데 따다 다디 농아를 좀 만들었더니들이 나 오냐면 코 토마면 고네 들인 들었더니들이 남주 집이 좀 요래지 들인 난 다디 딱와는 남주 집이 됐다 딱와 직장 매가지 하고 요래 토도거지 리드 토도 샘도 토고요 말 샘도만 토지지 다디기 정도 요래 तेरा दाद कहाँ तो था तारी सुनूं जितनी बेतम से तेरा लाभ जाना तेरे देवता से नंग लोन से सोंग शब्द शेयर किया जितने ताता नोट को योरी दे ता चंद जो ताऊ ना जिंजे मेवा साम से खाकोना बोल ये चीज़ में लोग तो खाकोना तेरे नंग लूज़े तेरा बड़े लूज़े सुनूं जितनी बिंदु वांगा थाना लूज़ थोड़ा लोग थे तामुने गाँव चिपा करे दाई नहीं मेरे करे तेरा 살류에 때는 동걸 메디 류리들 류말이지 샘리에데 샘이는 메디 로디 메타 동걸다 메디 가도 딱딱되는 이는 딱게 땅 로디 딱게 땅 그 샘리 샤지 그 샘도 가도 땅이 뛰어 샘리 샤 설롱직디한 지 오민 진짜 내가 만도 치라 남지 샘지 다 매니시라 그 샘지 담제 내다 하고 저번도 또 저를 루셈이가다 멋지를 루셈이야 옆 가야는 저진이 저과에 대왕도 봐 저과 동해모도 봐 저과에 샤 루셈이 삼지 생위에도 저과 이제 저자리 이거 땅을 이제 저기 루셈도 저저 가나를 고트고요 이제 저기 마시나 들리들이서 다 셈나 딱게 땅 가다니 베트리 sau게 땅 가다디 적도 통거를 셈 통거 말이 셈만 따라한 것은 저 딱게 땅 거래지
So the outer universe may be limitless, but regardless of how vast it is included within the body of a single person, a single sentient being. Because the outer universe consists of the 5 elements, and a person's body also consists of the 5 elements. So a person's body is an example of the entire outer universe having the same nature. For example, a person's bones and so on are the earth element, and then the fire element is a person's warmth, and then the blood, for example, is the water element, the breath, the wind, and the mind is the space element. So the 5 elements are complete within one's own body and have the same nature as the universe. And then, if that is the case, then why is it that sentient beings in this variety actually come into existence that way? It is first and foremost because they grasp at a self. It is this perception of I that they have grown used to since beginningless time in samsara. And that is what has created the inner sentient beings within this universe. But also those sentient beings are not permanent. They also will become destroyed in the end. They will perish in the end. So what perishes is actually one's body, but not the mind. The mind for a sentient being will continue to grasp at a self. And when we then try to find where actually is that self, where can we actually find that self? What actually is that? So when we talk about when we look at these lines of reasoning according to the text carefully, it can really clear away our doubts. But in essence, in brief, how we can understand it is that there is nothing that we can find to grasp at. This body will disintegrate. So we think that this is what we are this body, but this body itself is not lasting, it will disintegrate. So then who really is that I that we hold on to, and that perception of self and others? We see the outer form, we see others' bodies. For example, two people see each other's bodies, but who really is the person, that I, that self? Is it really that body? Because when that body dies, it becomes a corpse, and the corpse is burned. But then where is the person, where is the self? So when you look at a friend or somebody else, investigate who that person really is. So clearly it's not the body. So if it's not the body, then the person is the mind. So then if the person is the mind, where is the mind actually? There's nothing that you can find to grasp at. So first of all, we have learned that the entire outer universe cannot be grasped at, it does not inherently exist. And so then the same investigation we do with regard to the sentient beings. So we look at a person, and when you understand the essence of one person, then you understand the essence of all beings. Then you understand that the mind of an animal, for example, and the human being are exactly the same. Even though their bodies, their shape is different, their mind is the same. Their wish to be happy and their wish not to suffer is the same. So the basis of mind is the same. And then, that is the single basis that we have mentioned. And so that mind needs to be investigated. How can we find the person within the mind? So we have established that the other person is not the body, but then we cannot see the mind of the other person, so we cannot really figure out the other person. And so for this reason, in order to understand, we need to look and investigate our own mind, turn inward to investigate our own mind.
대회나 딸이 셈이가 셈대 동야면 셈대 남도 망보든 통거리 다 남도 망보든 통거리 오셈 남도 망보리지 너마치 전화에 남도 망보통 남도데 기름제도 미로 요래간다 미로도 근데 남도 샤도선 샤킹게 통크기 시바지 통크기 시바지 답을 내게요 가디는 요래 통크기 시바지를 당시 메롱답에 띄구나 했더니 좀 힘이 담으면 메롱군이 착해요래 생코랑 딱봐 내기요래 자사대 대라 생코랑 자지대 하고서나 자지게 생대 대라 내방가 마음과 맞지 나또 직장 맞지나 코살라면 요래 하고나 대라 파로와서 처럼 와요 말봐 대회 자세라니 소두면 토마 세부 내려온 통 지내서게 세부는 롱메바 하고 요리시 롱메바 하고니 무슨 코를 생기다 따도 롱 요리시 로바통은 로라고서 동에 먹고 연구 요리시다 로바도 르때도 좀데 딱벌 코르는 로도 못 잡지는 마로가 탑지 세부 내려온 통은 롱메바 하고서나 이렇게서 나빠나지 돼서 그 요리시 일라니 소두면 뭐라서 와 강게 주고 로미제 짱스 로도 tek도 좀 제바 된 로아서리 뭐로아 강레 로키 셈리 셈랑 과다버지라 롱메 발때서 공을 뒤 셈으로 하고 이제는 롱도 나과다 하고나 현대 상로들 때지 들 철기와 강지 수치가 하고 오면 토만 데려도 요 말이 타마들은 저와 요 말 세들 셔로야 요 말이 르드 셔로 말이 따고 파로 하면 총하면 코철 기와 강이 하고 오면 코셔지하면 뭐도 상들이 과찬 다 셈들 너무도 계셔도 상이 대자 하고는 하나만 과찬 요래지
So we can't see our mind, but when we look at the mind, we observe many thoughts. We see many thoughts arising in the mind. And that mind, the discursive mind, is like polluted water. And the thoughts always come and go. They arise and then disappear. But then underlying that there is an awareness that recognizes, takes notice of all those arising thoughts. And that awareness, that conscious mind always stays. It is always there. So that is the one we should look at. The awareness that recognizes always what arises. So this consciousness is like a mirror. And many things are reflected in the mirror. But the basis, the mirror, or the clear mind itself remains as it is. It always remains. At the time when past thoughts have stopped and future thoughts not yet arisen, when there is a state of no thought, then you can gain a glimpse, a clear understanding of the natural state of the mind that always remains. That is still there. So that mind does not come and not go. In the 37 Bodhisattva practices, in the very beginning, it says, Chenrezig, someone who has seen the nature of mind, Chenrezig realizes that mind neither comes nor goes. But samsaric sentient beings always go around. And because they go around, they always suffer. So the text, 37 practices, therefore says, so although he realizes that phenomena neither come nor go, he makes a single-minded effort for the sake of sentient beings. So that single-minded effort is to give sentient beings a method to stop going around and abide within the natural state. Because they who, like Chenrezig, who have realized that the mind doesn't come and doesn't go, have realized the space-like nature of the mind, and within that nature they always remain without coming and going. So who is it that goes around? What is it, and how can we not go around? So the one who goes around actually is the mind itself. But then the one who meditates on the space-like nature of the mind, realizes that the mind is beyond coming and going. Such a one will begin to understand that, in fact, the mind on the basis never goes anywhere. And so the mind has never arisen from anywhere, so it is unborn. No one can determine its beginning point. This is where it begins. This is where it comes from. There's no arising of the mind. And then also, the mind never ends. It never ceases to be. It never dies. It is only the body that dies. So the mind does not arise, is never born, and it never ceases to be. It doesn't die. So in this way, you can begin to get an understanding of the mind which is beyond coming and going, or birth and death.
대회 생롱 매바지시 아주 semje 가린 정도 이제 그러나 나진인지 내가 차단가 또 봐지 따다운 semje 미게 되는 누주이가 저요래 누주이가 semje도 없이 대하고고 대다다 고속고 요 말이 semje 가리 저요래나 좀 둘레다 바차 선홍적이 저요래 그거 같아 마음이 빨리 들으면서 생각을 안 하고 저로 가지들 별에 셀렸다다 이제 셀지로 내리니 마 보나 이 이제 철진 자진 강분을 찾더니 사용을 요래 샘 그거 안 하고 별에 다시 이게 되는 내 셀한 거안 그랬어 야 미실이게 되는 표현 자충을 가도 내려서 무슨 저기 납주 샘기 삼지 돼도 샘 그런 거 가도 샘 그런 거안 쓰겠다 아때다 그래 라지가 적용을 제 말이 늦지와 그래 접속하다 우보리상나 당마 박차로 가리 저요리 되는 제 말한 것 같니 양랑 소수 샘대가 늦지가 저요리 이제 서울로 대리 정도들이랑 생구 조당데 말한 거를 하고 그래 뒤에는 뒤에 생기 레망 보사리 레디 남이 맞아 봐도 뒤에 우보가 나와 찰도 요리 This is Masha, but this is now the Dekayori. When Namsek Mamita, Leg Pakchadi, Namtava, that's a Tini now at the Dreamit of a Chadi Yori. Leg Pakchadi, Nam Sepatan, the Roman Shadoy. She said, now Pardon is a young child Yori. There Jiwat and Chua knew Barney. 这样的业就透过啥了？扬州有的，大大的公路就是把它出个业有啥的，我现在用这干的有的，这一透过啥的，这那这他们这个产业广泛的，这我信了，那个单位的业，生活呢我也在下高上了，这个他们去做了，一年搞的全了，这里哪往生是他接的，这个那看那干菜用了，生活是吧？ 做当地的没人问我哩，还让挂的茶用我要的，这茶的怕晒热了，这是冲着做要的，才冲上哦，南村不是最多上挂上茶用过来，当地用过来。
So then we understand that the mind, the basis of mind doesn't come and doesn't go. And so then why is it that we sentient beings still go around? It is because we first of all grasp at a self, and then we grasp at a duality. We give rise to thoughts of attachment and aversion. And that mind is what creates the person, a human being, and then the humans create the world, the universe. So it is all essentially made by the mind. But normally we cannot understand that. How is it made by the mind? How is the universe made by the mind? The outer universe is created by the collective imprints of beings. It is the reflection of the mind, of the collective mind of beings. For example, if you have a crystal ball and the sun shines on it, then the entire room will be filled with rainbow lights. And these are the natural reflection of the crystal. So similarly, the universe is the reflection of the mind being like the crystal. But somebody who doesn't recognize that will just look at the rainbows and see them as separate from the crystal and think that this is a rainbow, and then they will focus on their colors and so on. But actually it is a reflection of the crystal. And in the same way, naturally, the outer universe is reflected from the mind. So, and what is reflected, that is what we hold to be true. It appears to be a separate reality to us. But how it really comes about, we can actually understand by looking at our dreams. In our dreams also, our imprints create a universe. When we are dreaming, in the dream you create an entire universe and sentient beings, only through the mind that is reflected from your mind. So that is the seed of that in the mind. So here you can understand how, based on the dream, you can understand how the mind creates the universe. And so then we have accumulated many actions, much karma. And until that karma comes to an end, things will continue to appear the way they do. So until the karma of this life comes to an end, the appearance of this life, the perception of this life will continue to appear to us. And whenever it comes to an end, whenever this karma is exhausted, then the appearance of this life will also come to an end. It is just like a butter lamp. The butter, the oil is like one's karma, and the appearance of this life is like the flame. So whenever the oil or the karma is exhausted, then also the flame, the appearance of this life is extinguished. And after we have died, then we come to the bardo, and again another universe and sentient beings appear in the state of bardo. And in that state between birth and death, the mind actually arrives at its basic luminous nature. as you mentioned before, the Dharmakaya, the first bardo. So there is a way to recognize the luminous basic nature of the mind. And if one recognizes this nature at this point, then one attains enlightenment in the Dharmakaya. And so in this way, you can understand how all is created by the mind. So first, we need to resolve that the all appearances are the mind. And so then, understanding that, we can understand that anything, this entire universe, whatever appears, is a creation of the mind. And we, again, can understand that on the basis of looking at our dreams. And when you gain an understanding of that, then gradually the fixation to this outer reality, this concrete reality, will diminish. And you will not cling to them too much and think that that is actually all just created by the mind. So this is the first experience you should gain in the practice.
서비스 도발 좋았어. 유무만 나도 이 시간이라면 이런 정도로 이 시간이라면 이제 다 보니 맞춰야 돼요. 나쁘지가 가리 다서 나지 니지 다서 나쁘지가지. 신강 탐질 사다 뭐 사지 장매 봐요. 니지 요말 거서라. 니 이상 말이자 또 봐요 말이더라. 니스메 비시디 대대니 다부지가 사탐지 자와 탐지 실론데 찍데 라고 사야 찍으네요. 찍리 셈 찍을 사탐지 유튜브 라찍고 탐지를 잡다고요. 그래야지. 라이시 빨리 쳐야 되더니 이 쳐 가는 연구를 니지 메베 됐다고 차대요. 되는 매발이는 매발 말이 다 이점도 뭐 요아리 다 이점도 뭐 요는 다 이점도는 첫특과 찍도 모르는 산업지 방송 잠시초리 찍마도 매가다 대답 사지 거다 생하면 말이 요아리 니 요말이 니스도 같이 봐요 말이 고르스지 니 요베를 들이 차당은 똑같단 말이니 나호 다지 니지는 된 말이니 들이 차당은 똑같단 말이니 니를 해줘도 도도도도 자공라고 차노 대신에 따지만 내가 가리 오 당한 생구 내놓게 하고니 데리지 나보다 유모 같아 시작해봐 다 쉽게 탑들까지 돈이 고와서 시작하고 요 말이 대들 마도 같은 삼hin계기나 다 이비로만 보지나 들이 샘디 저좀 뭐라 차한 거요래 돈이 똑바로 흥기고서 토와 돈이 돈을 다 삼hin계고 흥기곰들이 흥기질들이 다다 돈다고 대봐 라미가 통통하다 또 나한테 세나 들이 라가 세고 내려 쳤다만은 자영을 들이 양당들이 쳤다는 게 많아지 또 듣고 요래 또 대회 양설린다 되겠다 혼돈이 인도고 그들이 당고 레좀되는 것이 들이 산촉생이 용등시 들이 은혜 산촉생 세비를 hin지 저거 줄었지나 들이 센터로 로다 들이 저런 타마 철션을 쳤다고 말해도 자 들이 쳐에 내려 들이랑 그랑 하고 와서 들이 돈다고 되면 통지 빠지지 들이 돈나 당고 이 핑으로 유제배 발생나 설이 찰나 뒷감들이 생겨내는 거지 대지 통로 양탁관 통고요래 다당수 권조 내가 통나야 니디가 관계야 럽도요래 대회 뭐 내가 요 말이 대회 산촉생 삼hin지기 정보를 해야 돼 다쪽 동담대만 물리시나 자로도 시원히 쳤다마 자손 동담대 말해 좋다다 자로를 해지 대장보다 못 갑니다 자로도 시원 탑인지 가리 문이 진짜 삼hin지 곰 동진지 주제 뭐 곰도 나 자로도 이만은 딱 봐줘 대반이 차대열가 동담을 때만 다쪽대다 라고 생각 내로 인정다 다 고속고요 말이 대답을 해.
So then, when we engage in practice and we practice this, we begin an understanding first on the empty nature of all compounded phenomena. And as you begin to gain an understanding through meditation practice, the thoughts of attachment and aversion will more and more fall apart. If they do not fall apart, if they continue to stay in your mind, then you will continue to accumulate karma. If attachment and aversion collapse, then you will not engage in negative karma. If there is no karma, then also there is no ripening of karma. When the cause is empty, also the result is empty. And so that is what we call the ultimate truth of emptiness. So in order to realize the ultimate truth of emptiness, as we mentioned first, we need to understand the relative truth of the infallibility of karma, cause and effect. Because within not understanding that, if we haven't actually realized emptiness, we still do give rise to ordinary afflictions, which become the cause. of accumulating karma. And if karma is created, it can ripen it can actually ripen at any moment. So we have said that this universe is created by the mind. How have people's mind created this universe? It is created by the thoughts in the people's minds. The mind itself actually is like space by nature, but beings have not realized that, and they perceive instead a self, an I. And even though they exchange bodies, their mind never dies, so they continue to perceive the self. And when the body dies, then the consciousness goes on into the bardo, and there it assumes a mental body that still possesses the other four aggregates, the four name aggregates, just it does not possess the aggregate of form, but it still possesses the aggregate of consciousness, of sensation, of perception, of karmic formation, just not the body. And that is the existence of beings without a body. They possess all the other four aggregates and experience the suffering of lacking a body. So then in the bardo, due to previous karmas, afflictions again arise, attachment arises when we encounter our future parents, and as a natural tendency, we enter into the womb of our parents and take birth anywhere in the 6 realms of samsara. So we can see the mind is the one who has created the person, like a human. And so how is it when you recognize the thoughts? So at the bardo consciousness, if someone is in a bardo but has cultivated bodhicitta, then that consciousness will not be controlled by afflictions, but will have the freedom through having cultivated bodhicitta. So that consciousness can go to the Pure Lands, for example. So it is bodhicitta that gives you this freedom. As a natural reflection of bodhicitta, the Pure Lands and the forms of the deities and so on will appear. For example, if a person is just a good-hearted person, then everyone will be their friend, just naturally. It's the natural reflection of bodhicitta. So the perfect Buddhas arise from the altruistic mind. So when there is bodhicitta, then naturally the Pure Lands and forms of Buddhas and deities will reflect. And on the other hand, if within the mind there is self-grasping, affliction, for example, if anger is the predominant affliction, then it will manifest as the hell realm. Or if ignorance is the predominant affliction, it will manifest as the animal realm. So the same is true for all the other afflictions. And then within each affliction, the other afflictions are contained. So only attachment on its own leads to birth as a human, for example. Or greed on its own leads to birth as a hungry spirit. So when we engage in practice, we need to understand, recognize the empty nature of these afflictions. We must recognize the basis from where they arise, the mind, and then the nature of those afflictions themselves. So, for example, now anger has arisen, this is anger, or this is another affliction. You recognize the affliction as it arises, and through recognizing and sustaining awareness, it will become like ice melting into water. So when the affliction of anger melts like ice, then like ice into water, then you will clearly not act out on the anger and begin to fight or quarrel, because you're not angry, there's no more anger. Then you will be patient naturally. So first you control the affliction by understanding karma, cause and effect. Because you want to be happy, you want to cherish bodhicitta. And because you do not want to suffer, you want to give up the affliction. So that is to practice according to the pratimoksha path. And then on the Bodhisattva path, also you will not get angry because there is no object of anger. You are compassionate, and therefore you will not want to harm anyone. So you transform the afflictions through love and compassion. And then if you're somebody who has realized the view, then according to the Samantabhadra prayer, the more afflictions arise, the greater the wisdom awareness will be. For example, when anger arises and you recognize anger, anger manifests as clarity. Like it is said in the prayer, may beings, may they recognize, may they attain the wisdom of clarity. And in a similar way, the other 5 afflictions are purified into the 5 wisdoms. And as they are purified into the 5 wisdoms, then the Pure Lands and the forms of Buddhas will naturally manifest. And that is because all dualistic grasping the self and others is purified. And then these Pure Lands are pervaded by gods and goddesses, but they do not perceive that existence as a dual reality. That is, there is no thought of it is dual or it is not dual. There is no grasping at all. There is only non-dual primordial wisdom. So it is said within the expanse of primordial wisdom, all the Buddhas are one. So therefore, even though there might be a million deities, they have a single mind. So therefore, a single deity pervades all the deities. So that is the special quality of a wisdom being, a wisdom deity. They do not have any dualistic grasping. But then once one attains enlightenment, one does not just cease to be, one does not just go out of existence. It is just like one becomes one with the vast ocean. The ocean is still there. And whenever you pick up a drop of water from the ocean with your finger, it's the same water. That drop of water is exactly the same water as any water in the ocean. Whether you go to the east or west, wherever you go, there's only one water. And in a similar way, the Pure Lands and the enlightened forms do not discontinue to be, do not disappear. They are there, but exist in a state of non-duality. As opposed to sentient beings in samsara who exist in a state of duality, not non-duality. It is because sentient beings grasp at self and others, they hold others to be true, and therefore they give rise to thoughts of attachment and aversion, which they also hold to be true, and that solidifies more and more, and we wander in samsara. So when you realize the nature of the mind and observe the afflictions as they arise, those afflictions and thoughts will all diminish. But of course it requires practice. Only understanding that it is empty alone will not destroy, will not cause the afflictions all to fall apart. And so therefore a person who has realized that also develops great compassion for those sentient beings who have not understood that. So this altruistic mind becomes like hot water, warm water, that melts the block of ice. So therefore, in order to realize emptiness, it is necessary to cultivate compassion. First, we meditate on loving kindness and compassion, and as a result, we naturally will begin to see the ultimate truth. Because through love and compassion, the self disappears. And when the self disappears, the mind becomes pure, just like water becoming purified. And when the water becomes purified, you can easily realize its clear nature, the clear nature of the mind. And so this is the reason why we follow a path of starting with the preliminaries. In order to come to this realization, we must first understand the workings of karma, and as a result of that, we understand the qualities of bodhicitta. And understanding the qualities of bodhicitta, then we develop immeasurable compassion. And if we develop compassion, the mind becomes relaxed, at ease. And as the mind releases itself, it melts like ice melting into water. And only then, when the ice has melted, you can see the nature of the water, the pure nature of the mind. So when the self-grasping diminishes through compassion, then you can see the ultimate truth, the nature of the mind. And so in brief, when we first need to cultivate an ongoing state of altruism. And only then, only when altruism is always present, then the nature of the mind that you see is the actual nature of the mind. So right now, when we meditate, but we do not have this ongoing state of altruism, we meditate and temporarily we may glimpse the nature of the mind, but still we fall right back into dualistic grasping and are obscured. So we have not actually realized the nature of the mind. To really see it as purely as it is necessary to melt the block of ice with love and compassion, to really see the pure nature of the mind. And so this is what we have mentioned in the refuge vow. The refuge vow, we have said, is a method. It is the method to melt the ice. So now your mind is like ice, and here is the method. You should cultivate love and compassion, which means, for example, it's like saying put the ice block into the sun all the time, and then it will melt. And if you do so, and the ice block melts, then you will finally see the ultimate truth, the actual or pure nature of the mind. But otherwise, it will be difficult to understand.
사제정보 시합되는 다다 철도하는 것도 내가 라더 주베 시합인데 세고 내로 고랑세 다시 시합 나도 같이 시기 시바 싸고 대라 뒤니 대리 답이도 맞추니 또 가르쳐 그러지 시합 대기 조기와당 먹기와 레버티 조기와 사족성구 배용 조먹기와 유모 다지다 유모의 중세 사오전에 내상부 가라 디 랑도 주부 시랍들게 예와던 먹기 가하고네 되게 저 사족성도 딱 보자 시월에 대 사지 정보 시랍되나 디치기 시랍 대 양장도 또 사족성부 가니 조람 탐지라더니 삼바상 기지 탐지 네 먹기와 빵 랑도로 주바 많아 봐지 대기서들이 상인지 제보 제보감이 들이 시랍 고랑대 시랍다 hin지 예배가 차한 거래 들이 hin지 제보 차나 들이 시랍을 되니 다기님이 봤더니 하고한테 대기치고 시랍 빈 타토 시랍 뭐들이 있으면 봐지 대하고 대르들이 다리 잡을 가면 도마 사제지 뭐 시랍을 잡은 저 토마 잡은 로건 담보 잡은 로서 로지 장합사 수남 거 떠고 되니 나 잡은 로도 여봐 잡은 로가 와서 내 말이 답을 맨디 좀 망고도 요나 수 답도 막고 권초선 되니 남들이 속여 배 공부에 배 공문이나 산지 중화고 취송하고 대만 내바고 대만 내장제를 쇼바고 쇼는 주처진도 바고 제가 공원에 다도 산지 고방 하정 공부에 배서 권초선 함성 디시압 대당 타톡 산지 고방 더디 라니 소주면 나서 디시압 대 벌써 넘버만 또 시압도 시압 대 상대예요 그래 나지 니지 요복감이 다 이라 나도만 인피장장 공대는 나지세서 hin지 쳔보지나 들이 나지님에 봐 호스턴 넘버만 또 시랍 나당 이당 고대가 취탐제더니 좀았다고 동우보단 처럼 말해봐 대학원이 호스턴 넘버만 또 시랍 이 산지 고르면 시랍도 팔아서 봐야지 이 시랍에서 딱 가리고 있는 거를 다른 점도 막 무슨 산지 사지에 고방 맞춰봐도 시랍 대가라는 게
So when we received the refuge vow before, you received this refuge card with your name on it. And so on this card, it also says, when you first take refuge, I take refuge in transcendent awareness, the heart essence of the Buddha. So this transcendent awareness, that is your wisdom, the discriminating wisdom that knows what actions to engage in, what to do and what not to do. So the actual nature of the mind is this transcendent awareness, the wisdom mind. So it is this mind that knows, that clearly knows whatever thoughts arise within the mind. And it knows, it discerns between virtue and non-virtue, between various causes. So this discriminating wisdom understands the benefits of bodhicitta and understands the faults of affliction and self-grasping clearly. It can clearly discern. So that is the inner Buddha. So for a beginning practitioner, in the beginning, we understand that awareness, this mind that knows what to do and what not to do as our inner Buddha. The one that discerns between virtue and non-virtue, and therefore knows that one should uphold and practice bodhicitta. And so then that bodhicitta need to be applied in all activities. In all activities you should treat others with love and compassion and give up any non-virtuous conduct. So you first begin the practice with practicing what you should do and giving up what you should not do unmistakably, clearly discerning between what you should do and what you should not do. And then next, as you practice in this way, love and compassion will increase. So then when there is great compassion, wisdom and compassion become a union. When there is great compassion, wisdom increases, because when there is great compassion, the self diminishes and you realize that self and others do not exist separately. So ultimately, there is only a state of non-duality. So this is what we learn in the refuge, and we say, I take refuge in transcendent awareness, the heart essence of the Buddha. So it is that mind that wants to take refuge. You want to take refuge. You want to take refuge because you already have accumulated merit in the past. That is why you now want to take refuge. That is why you are so fortunate. Of all those many people in the world, how many actually take refuge and enter the path of the three jewels? It is very rare. That is why we mentioned before the three jewels literally mean the three rare and supreme ones. It is very rare for the Buddha to appear, and then more rare for the Buddha to teach the Dharma, and then even more rare for the Dharma to remain, and even more rare for there to be followers who enter the Dharma, and then even more rare for there to be followers who enter the Dharma who actually properly practice the Dharma. So extremely rare. And this wisdom that you now recognize, that the one that knows what to do and what not to do, this wisdom is that wisdom is the one that will be there when you attain enlightenment. It's the same wisdom. In the 37 practices, it is referred to as the non-conceptual wisdom that transcends the three spheres. So that wisdom is the one that will later attain enlightenment. And so at this moment, at this time, when we still perceive a duality of self and others, we first need to cultivate altruism, and cultivate it all the time, only cultivate altruism. And through cultivating altruism all the time, self-grasping diminishes. And when self-grasping diminishes, great compassion arises. When great compassion arises, you understand the meaning of non-duality, that self and others do not exist. And then you realize this non-conceptual wisdom that transcends the three spheres. And then you realize that everything that appears in samsara and nirvana, self and others, are like illusions, appearing illusions, but do not actually truly exist that way. So that is what this non-conceptual wisdom realizes. And ultimately, it is referred to as the perfection of wisdom. The Buddha is called the perfection of wisdom. And that wisdom that is in the end perfected is that same continuum of wisdom mind that you have recognized today when you take refuge, and will continue. That is the one that will continue on from today onwards until it attains enlightenment.
대외 다다더니 대 양천이 뭐 탑라다다 라미라다 망고송고 요래 대 사지 가서 대 신내서 상통송 신내서 상통이 그 몸의 망벌이 저렇게 라미라 망보 요래지 이런 남바 사지에 쪼더니 돈이 hin지선 제와서 대 신내서 상통 장반이나 변나 생분 내록대 파티나 시합진 탐지 또 반지 뭐 하고 요래 동반지 와 하고양 드니 하고아 담지 좀들 거 반데 니 가요 오 담도 이마도 오 세군에로 코는 담도 가양 마독산 제다하지 마독산 받은 노와 마독산 받 담지더니 매일로 요말이 주다는 단지 요리 단지들의 유모바 요리 내도 요리 데렸지니 다 지지가 로르지 차다가 레소신 로요리 하장님 같이 봐요 그래 데르지니 제다하지 제배 종무지 야 가시게 다 받쳐가 딱딱하지 이제 간데 네 말이 네 말, 인발을 때문에 막 갈리지 가다 집안에 이제로 네 말이 인생에 딱 벌다 와서 대회를 당고 가서 양이 제바탐죠. 당고 딱 벌다 와지 좋은 거리. 타만 니들이랑 이제 뭐다 찍경 좀 해봐서 당에 들이 지지서 가는 거리. 땅문이 강양 마도 사는 좀 해봐 차 거리. 강양 마도 사는 뒤감이 다 제발 다 왔대. 좀을 다 산지 좀 되는 따랑 다 왔대나 봐봤지. 가을이 뚱문지상 타지상 잡았지. 타지도 잡아 강의들은 딱 붙이면 잡아. 들은 오동만 나갔다 와서 오동을 딱 타다 잡지. 세군 내려오라 시민애들. 야 동반이 남카 동봤다 이장 라기 서비스 사람이 요래 철학을 세면 때려다 생동바 그지 차오나 지 신경이 시바사고 사람이요. 오 라고 세고 내려고 철거는 암조니 맞다며 세면 되나? 셈 남카다 그러지. 남카다 그러더니 하고 공기 시바지 싸고 대대서 동성 두들이 딱 붙어 오동을 딱 붙어를 잘 라기사게 제법마다 딱 제지 두고도 잡아. 이 당하지 책 망고송 타마디 딱 제는 타다 잡아. 되는 누구요래. 그런 농담을 봐가 싫어 돼 조금만 뭐 탑제라서 와 시켜요래. 철 무슨 야처럼 이제 딱 제는 타다 잡아. 라고 세고 내려고 됐다 그래. 뒤에 봐나. 뒤에 밥도 요래. 제일 공들이 전에 남도 탐지 시송나 남도 탐지 시어가면 생부 내려고 됐지 통나. 되니 대화치 본 남파동만 나긴 통나 뒤지 싸고 시바들 상통지 시바들 도고송 시바들 싸고송 맞더니 전에 장과 그냥 중은 좋고 요리 대탐지 중세가더니 삼hin기는 이제 기체버리 돈이 hin기는 이제 와지 돈 hin기 정고리 돈이 돈이야 요 말에 송대.
And so then in terms of how to engage in practice, there are many different methods that are explained when it comes to practice. But according to the words of the Buddha, the practice consists of the shamatha, calm abiding, and vipassana, the special insight. And so forms of this meditation is practiced throughout various different lineages and systems and religions. And a special quality, however, of the Buddhist meditation is to cultivate the union of emptiness and compassion. So first, when we meditate on shamatha and vipassana, when somebody that possesses wisdom looks at their mind, they might understand emptiness. But then there is a danger that it remains a mere understanding of emptiness, And if it only remains that, there's a danger that one will deny the principle of karma, cause and effect. And then one just falls into the extreme of nihilism and says just nothing exists at all. There is no self, there is no other, nothing exists. And so that could lead to a great mistake, because only thinking that nothing exists will not lead to the non-existence of everything, because still you grasp at a self, still you have affliction, still you want to be happy, and therefore you will still engage in actions of attachment and aversion. So there is a great danger then in denying the workings of karma. So that is the fault of nihilism. And then the other fault is that of eternalism, which is what most people hold. They believe that everything that there is, this world, is real. They hold on to the truth of the appearances that appear to them, as we mentioned before. So when we engage in practice, the first step that we need to take is to first overcome the grasping at reality. So we first overcome the eternalist view by seeing everything as impermanent and seeing that there is nothing that truly exists that you can really grasp at. So we first come to the conclusion that everything doesn't exist, nothing exists. And so first we overcome this eternalist view, and then that leads us to the nihilistic view, and then that's the next that need to be overcome. And we overcome both of these wrong views through the view of the Buddha, the way the Buddha overcame the two extremes. So the Buddhist view is free from the two extremes. First of all, it is free from the fault of eternalism, because the nature of the mind in essence is empty like space, so it doesn't really exist. But then it also is free of the fault of nihilism, because it is not just emptiness, but also it is naturally clear awareness. So when you look at the mind, there still is this clear conscious mind. When you look at the mind and in a moment it is completely empty, then still there is this clear conscious mind that is there. And that you cannot identify. It is like space. So it is a union of clarity and emptiness. So the eternalist view is dispelled by the empty space-like nature of the mind, and then the nihilistic view is dispelled by recognizing the clear awareness of the mind. So in this way, the Buddhist view is free of all extremes. And that can be explained in many terms. According to the scriptures, there are various different extremes, there are 4 extremes or 8 extremes and so on. But ultimately, when it comes to practice, from a practical perspective, all the extremes, all the faults, all the faulty views are included within those two extremes. And the nature of the mind is free of those 2 extremes. So first, when we practice shamatha, calm abiding, at this point, first our thoughts are pacified, they calm down. And then when they calm down and you see the nature of the mind as it is, you experience great bliss, which is vast like space. And so that knowing, that seeing of the clear knowing of the nature of the mind, that is the vipassana, especially insight. So it is also necessary to sustain clear insight while meditating. If one only sustains a state of shamatha or calm abiding, it can also lead to some faults if it lacks the clarity of insight. And so the clarity also we sustain is compassion. So we cultivate the union of emptiness and compassion, of which compassion is most important, because emptiness alone is not sufficient. We need to cultivate the union of emptiness and compassion.
좀 담친 dimbal에 연구요래. 변은 마디바데나 서로 족라. 족로 뛰는 데 마차고 가는 족ting 통나 데를 셈까지 차송되는 다셈까지 오 뒤족도 약보서 하정지 보던 통도 데 차송나데 양초고 저와 다들 대시대 용면도 쳤나 오 종지 보들 다 초고요데 오 데를 하정 약본도 없어 셈차상지도 초고요 말이야 족라면 되니까 오 족이니까 대는 진도 용과 가래나 집이 시합되구나 집이 시합되는 공나 잘라 대다가 야 대탐제 남성 제발들이 라리 소비만 나기 야 족라면디바 라라면디바 야 또바라면디바 메바라면디바 대탐제 남성 제발들이 라리 소비만 송아지도 배르게 추상보리 나오고 오 세우가 하나 오 민진송아스 나 맞춰가 소리네 야 내려부터 싫어 저 추상보리 좁아서 소소 장보면 가르침 봐요 말이지 소소 장보는 좀 소소 님바요는 추상보리 또 배박고요 말이지 소소 장이 소소 딱게도 고치 해봤다는 말이지 대라티니 대다가 되게 서로 삼바라 니라 차과 다라 다와 대라서 와탐지 초아지 하고는 제도 머지나 셈도 담아 대게 요리 됐나 자바쇼는 셈은 초가된 오 하자 초와지 몰래 뭔가미 단 진용 그래 진이 시 대양도 진 들이 청 들이 따라 송처지 들이 달래서 온 거요리 됐나 진옥이 하다던데 적긴이 말이 맞지 답변은 뭐가 맞지나 제가 저 콩하나 가요 말이 되거라 콩하나 가면 뒤에도 뭐 톱서 콩하나 가면 되거라 코 가장 막아지는 되는 막아 이제 요 말이 제가 그때 집에 코로나 뒤서와도 오 콩하나 가면 막 가다 코로랑 송송 지기 피신이 같은 이제 바테 양성들은 들이대긴 청 들이대 가지고 세상랑 거요는 청지 야 근데 매진 신변 청소 좀 말했더니 신발들이 레서 오면라 야 따오는 가리 고소 마비 예주 제오는 다리 공을 집어지 내로 마리버 공을 따와는 그 갈라라 적당 맞지나 코고들 lap사도 바로 보대 다리 다리 공을 좀 마찬가지 lap자는 정말 동성 sem리진 요바께 그래 다시 내려 가는 저 밤에는 샘 소화가는 거면 매들이 다 샘도 듣고요 말이에요. 다들이 유몽 이실 저때 라브라 변을 세상지를 싸고 차는 거래. 되는 지들이 유몽 동안 시간은 저때 따와대다고 공통나. 대다고 대 공발세발 연료더니 남도 총총 담지 하고지 제시 봐요 돼. 손을 연료들라 동담고 dem바 강리들 진시 봐요 대리 강지 동이 시대 봐요 이 송사지게 동관이 동시잖아 저 봐요 말해 동관이 봐요들 가려지는 동관이들은 봐요 버가는 다다 대화도 동에 가려는 지 초아들 랩나 그 뭐지바 되게 말 동과 차로 봐 근데 밤이면 생기요 말이 그 봐도더니 동담고 대박에 유지 봐요 봤다고 차네 강지 봐요 시대 강지 동이 시대 봐요 이소 동관이 시반 봐요 거래서 라니 소주만인데 사고송 거래 동치 소주 소족과데 하장 가르쳐 오겠다고 하셔요 너나 강도 조람 제시 장스 랑그 샘제 내가 저라시 잡네 그러나 전도 진짜 쉽게 말 이동도 받자세라니 다 돈이 생원량이 전지를 특별히 가르쳐 가지고 막 작사만 보지나 바요는 지시 바요란데 그거래 나와 곰바 좁아서인데 나와 대다고 딱걸 곰고 곰바티 냠용디 좁아서 세고 좁아서 세디 갈 삼선이 못 차고요 삼선 다 동행 연구 참 같이 그 약보지 같이 동행 제일 지나 다주 따로 고마 주고 버려. 지는 수업 방구는 증빙 대 방구요 다. 소신지나 바로 보고 당신 면에 그거 당신 동행 연구 참 같이 그 약보지 같이 동행 제일 지나 다주 따로 고마 주고 버려. 지는 수업 방구는 증빙 대 방구요 다. 소신지나 바로 보고 당신 면에 그거 당신 우선 당신 좋아요. 나는 나타 매날 저 주지 나타 민족들 당은 나타도 녹된 매는 나타 삼는 밀린 나타 좋아요. 나타 요날 가야 말이 자잖아. 루지 좋아한 거 봐봐 짜서 세모 삼년도 노로리 살아 공지 되잖아. 나타 삼이 파도를 우르지 됐다고 내 빠져서 통고요. 좀좀 많이 배용디 됐다거든. 냠이 됐다고 쪼람도 세서고 쪼람도 세 맞잖아. 내가 뭐 밖에 출신이 냠이 쪼람도 세 맞잖아. 내 뱀이 잘 토과서라도 도움이 되나. 내 발은 미 공화강으로 출마지 야잖아. 강 팽그만 되리 다 고마 유는 뭐 고마 탑네 글씨도 좀 쳤다면 신기해서 참말이 열어. 다 데려라고 해 따와서 하고 고삼 나를 못 지나 어쩐도 준비지나 따와서 영화에 맞춰 두고 요래 그래서 대답했더니 남이 제거했지.
So this view is what we need to put into practice when we meditate, and the practice then is not to grasp at anything. The Sakyabha had also said, when there is grasping, you have lost the view, there is no view. And all faults come from grasping. And so we, for example, we grasp at form. You see a form, and then a beautiful form, and then what arises in your mind? You think it is very nice, very beautiful. So the feeling of attachment arises in your mind. But then your mindfulness should recognize this feeling of attachment that arises. So there's nothing wrong with looking at a beautiful form. It is also fine to think it is beautiful, but then you should not become attached to it. It arises within the mind, but you recognize that this thought has arisen in the mind. And so the same goes for any of the five sense pleasures. You sustain mindfulness, whatever you encounter, for example, sound and so on. So you put the view into practice, you take it onto the path, as the path, just according to the 37 Bodhisattva practices. Each of those verses is a way of taking the view on the path, to actually practice that view. So, and that when you sustain this view, then no matter what you encounter, you will not grasp. You will not grasp at form or at sound. You will not grasp at praise or blame. For example, if somebody tells you, praises you and tells you how great you are, then of course normally you think you like that, you're very happy, you like to be praised. But when that happy thought arises, you should recognize immediately, I'm grasping, I'm like to be praised. So actually, it doesn't matter whether other people praise us or not. If you're not actually that good, and the person just tells you you're good, it doesn't help anything. It doesn't make you any better. It is of no benefit. So whether you're good or not, really you can only decide for yourself. But only the words of others do not make us good or bad. So there's no point in grasping. And so the same then goes for any other circumstance. For example, when we grasp, when we cling to our families and friends and so on, and have an aversion against our enemies and so on, then when that feeling arises, you should recognize it and not cling to that feeling. And if you do not cling, then the mind remains very clear. if you cling, for example, if a very, very strong feeling arises, you immediately grasp at it. So that means you keep thinking about it again and again. And if you keep thinking about it, you begin to cling to it. And if you cling to it, then it will bind you, keep you in bondage, and you will lose the view. And if you lose the view, you accumulate karma. So whatever arises, do not grasp at it. So normally, how is it that we begin to grasp? First, we approach the object of grasping with our body, with the aggregate of body approaches. So we grasp because of the body. For example, if there's a person that you think doesn't like you, so you think, oh, he doesn't like me, and maybe something that happened yesterday that the person was angry or so, but it was just a temporary feeling, and you don't know if that is still present today, not necessarily present today. So if you think this person doesn't like me, then that grasping thought will naturally also be felt by the other person, and they will also grasp. And so then it will only lead to conflict between the two people. So if you keep grasping at something, it becomes, it keeps you in a bondage, it binds you. So whenever these kind of thoughts arise, for example, anger arises, and you keep dwelling on it, then it will bind you, it will keep you in bondage. So when you are in bondage by your clinging, then you accumulate negative karma. On the other hand, if you rest within the view, then even if somebody comes and blames you, you're unaffected by it. You do not think about it at all. Whatever the person says, it doesn't affect you at all. There's no thought about it. So if there's anything that maybe you have told them, maybe you have blamed them before, then you will only regret your own fault. That was not right of me. And you will go there and say hello, and will just have no negative feeling at all. And when there is no feeling at all, then the mind is unobscured. And then the affliction transforms into wisdom. So ideally, you sustain the view. For example, when anger arises and you sustain the view, the mind is very clear. And then, so in this way, the 5 afflictions transform into the 5 wisdoms. If you're able to sustain the meditation of the view, abiding in the view. And in order to come to that point, it is necessary to train in, first of all, recognizing all the smaller thoughts that always arise. Recognize all the small thoughts with mindfulness and conscientiousness or heedfulness. And if you always recognize all the thoughts that arise, if you're always mindful, that is then that will lead to realizing the ultimate truth. It is said what is emptiness is actually mindfulness or heedfulness. So how come that this mindfulness is emptiness? It is because when you are mindful, and then you recognize all the feelings that arise, happiness, suffering, and so on. And through recognizing them, you do not grasp at them. If you do not grasp, they become empty. And if you do not grasp, you will not cling, you will not be bound. And if you're always mindful, then you always are in a state of emptiness. So this is how a mindful state is emptiness, actually. And so, therefore, it is that mindfulness that we need to cultivate and try to sustain through practice. So the essence of that actually is very clearly explained in verse number 36 in the 37 practices. It explains that really in essence. So it says, in brief, whatever conduct one engages in, one should ask, what is the state of my mind? Accomplishing others' purpose through constantly maintaining mindfulness and awareness is the Bodhisattva's practice. So that really is explains the ultimate practice very clearly. And there is nothing that is actually of greater importance, nothing higher to practice than that. It is to sustain mindfulness at all times. So we practice the view, the meditation, and the conduct. When we meditate, we habituate the view. But then also it is necessary to bring that meditation, this habituation of the view, into one's day-to-day conduct in whatever you do. So then it doesn't make a difference what it is you encounter. Sometimes people will be nice to you, sometimes not. Sometimes you will experience good things, sometimes you will suffer. But whatever you encounter, if you grasp at it, you will lose the view. And always the one who is grasping will, in the end, be the loser, will lose out. And so now when another person, when you get angry at another person, sometimes we just believe that the other person is angry at us or doesn't like us. Maybe the person, that's not even occurs to the other person. Maybe the other person is not angry, but because you hold on to it, that the other person is angry with me, then you're actually creating such an aversion in that person. Or sometimes, for example, we are creating illness in that way with our thoughts. For example, you go to a doctor and the doctor tells you you might have that illness, and because the doctor says that, you believe, I have that illness, and by thinking about that illness, you actually might even create that illness, even if you actually don't have it. So sometimes we create an illness where there is no illness. And sometimes the other way around, even if there is an illness, if you do not cling to it, if you do not think about it, and just separate yourself from the body, then the illness will naturally exhaust itself. So it is possible to become cured in that way. So always think about the faults of grasping and the qualities of not grasping, and to try to implement that in your day-to-day activities. Because if you do not put that into practice in your day-to-day activities, then the Dharma that you know will be of no use. And Gampopa had said, a person who knows the Dharma but doesn't actually practice it is like a sick person next to a medicine bag, a bag full of medicine, that if he never eats the medicine bag, the medicine next to him will be of no use to him. And so in a similar way, we need to actually engage in practice. So we understand the view and then habituate the view through mindfulness. And we all have this mindfulness, this clear knowing capacity, the conscious mind. We only need to sustain it by practicing with diligence, sustaining this mindfulness with diligence. And eventually the view, mindfulness, will remain undistracted. So this is how we should practice.
다 동당상 주성군이 가지 휴어에 진원이 네 저게라고들 휴어에디 라니 소비면은 당 동당상 주성라 책이에 찍보여래 네 요요한테 세면지 인잖아 들이 남이 제대로 남상 그게 핑치 보여 네 받쳐 보여래 때문에 동도 지인이랑 측대 처리리 벤라리 소주만 착강리지 니보리지네 진시기 니비 총종의 송도 갑 제는 유모 벤라고 레레지버감이 니보리래 벤라 가자지버감이 양 니보리래 님빠타신 로망지도 남수버에 논도 톱질장 진지지네 들이앙들이 맞아 차로를 베르테 또 이보를 요리 데르더니 도담 산축생들 다 책이에 이 하자 약고요리 대타는 세면지는 가디나 이 피보요리지 도담 산축생들이 제다른 상황에다 랑거심 제다른 상황에다 랑거심 심리 도네 그룹 타당 잘 대니 실에 종진치마 나 이름도 자세라리 소 특히 피보여 대신에 유모바레 초우감이 밤에 바창을 남자들이 책도 제인들이 소리 피보요리
So I've explained a bit about the ultimate bodhicitta, and actually the ultimate bodhicitta is included in one verse in the 37 bodhisattva practices, in just these 4 lines in the Tibetan. And that is actually verse number 22. It says, appearances are one's own mind. From the beginning, mind's nature is free from the extremes of elaboration. Knowing this, not to engage the mind in subject-object duality is the bodhisattva's practice. So when you actually engage in practice, it is good to remember these words, because they will support your mindfulness and are very powerful. And actually, each of those 37 verses is an antidote to specific affliction or circumstance. So, for example, when pride arises, there's an antidote to that. So, when we become prideful, for example, though one may be famous and revered by many people, or gain wealth like that of Vajradhara, having realized that worldly fortune is without essence, to be unconsidered is the bodhisattva's practice, and so on. So each of the afflictions has a certain antidote, something to practice. And so especially now this verse on the ultimate bodhicitta, that is extremely beneficial to one's practice. If you really understand this verse, which is verse number 22, then every time an affliction arises, instead of becoming controlled by it and unmindful, you will be able to remember these words, and these words actually have also benefited my own practice greatly.
Roma tamji trawa mambo yogo 대부분은 제요리 오 냐와 요레스 냐와 랑 셈이 송스 랑 셈은 작아도 없이 코티들이 삼노상가도 트라테인 걸 리, 제대로 나와도 랑 셈은 냐와야 랑 셈이 예다야 랑 셈이지 저 이거 가래 냐와 저 해당을 좀 봐야나 지리 소소 그 해당당 냐와가 서운로 해당들이지 그래서 뭐라고 생각되는 게 요래지 근데 이제 시험아 좀 해당 망고도 사는 해당은 제거지 다 냐와 민용구 요래 냐와가 서운도 해당을 해야지 대회 랑게 셈이나 오 냐와 셈을 작도 셈가리 다다 문이 냐와처럼 셈자도 다 고안이 차요래 다대 빼놓으래 들이 당고고래 다다 네 사제가 무슨 인속을 요말 채도 말람 따고 송타와래 사제가 채 내양 말람 따고 송 동시에 가다라 냐와양 말람 따버리지 냐와양 말람 따고 차디요래 동 마시나 다다양 무소리 동행 연구요래 대마체 냐람감이라 적자 동이 사만 연구요라 대회는 다다 동시바 가르쳐 동대 마도나 동바지바 동대 마도나 산이 발도는 채도 말람자 왜지 뉴모바랑 뉴를 당잖아 동네들 용 다다리 카차와 다때 매일 냐미 든저를 차송을 야 대다로 가리참들이 다다 류디 요배나 류디를 동해 쳐보는 용나 류디 나도 제일 좋고요 류디 제일 좋고요 이런 생부터 냐와지 저 해당 사무들 맞아야 봐도 일단 용구죠 다들 맨날 냐면 든저서 등이 제일 준치 매봐 남이지 맞아야 봐 용구요래 대회는 다다는 냐서 말하나 별로 다다 체디 찍는 저래지 말람들 동방에서 그러라 대다버등이 송수비 동에서 말람 따분지네 대대비 중국 따뜻한 유머 벌어 또 낭매가 lang chado lang. 기와 제그 세상의 차도 온 게 소들이 주제고 소들이 세상의 차도 레사 과대 싸울 좋고 얼마 레사 이야기 때 서득 되자 그러면 상킹이 뉴모가 그 생각 그런 거요. 대상킹 내 뉴모보다 매도 상분도 그런 성나 서만이 뒤다 제 미용고요. 다시 당저 미용보 냐와 선을 미용보 예다. 야 도망르면 봤던 거 레전드 레전드 몽동아 창고요리 대회에서 사용 때문에 어떻게서 우겨이 가는 거로데 그것도 좀 돼서 안 해봐서 저도 나와다라는 그 샘순 그 샘이 뭐대리 그 샘이 세상이냐 말이 저라다와는 요래 고아대다고 차는 그래서 약보고 살에 같이 좋아요 거리 다 소소한 개발 많이 돼 좀 되고는 그 싸고 당겨요리 내가 뭐랑 고요리 등이 막고는 살때 그 모양 요요를 공나봐 개인이 막고 욕도 대삼질 내 하여튼 가르쳐버리 네 댐바든 통동만 통 제발 통윤디 막 통중디 하여고 하고 그래야지.
So in this verse it says appearances are one's own mind. And so with regard to that, actually very often students ask a question about that, and also something similar is explained in other books. So appearances are one's own mind. So then everything is mind. So then they are, we talk about the hell realms. We say the hell realms, there are those hell realms, but appearances are one's own mind. So those people think, well, if it's just mind, then it can't be that bad, if the hell is just mind. So to one extent it is true, it is mind, this appearance is one's own mind, like hell is one's own mind. In the same way, also hungry spirit realm is one's own mind, and so on. But we need to understand how it is our own mind. So the cause of birth in the hell realm is hatred. Hatred creates the hell realm. Hatred is the seed of the hell realm. And since that seed is in the mind, it is good to say, it is appropriate to say that hell is created by the mind. So we accumulate much hatred, and as a result, that will ripen as the hell realm. So the hatred is the seed in the mind of the hell realm. And so from that perspective, we can say hell is one's own mind, it is true. But then if one thinks that, well, if it's just mind, then it can't be so bad, then such a person, on the other hand, will, however, think that it is just mind as opposed to this life, which is real. So to them, this life is real, and hell is just mind. So they see it in these two ways, and that is a mistaken view. The Buddha himself even never actually said that this life is real. To the Buddha, this life is like a dream. And somebody who really understands this, to them also hell is like a dream, it is true. But to somebody who doesn't understand this, suffering is a real experience. One experiences an actual experience of fear and suffering and pain in the hell realms. It is a real experience. So if one has not realized the truth of emptiness, then later in the Bardom, this life will appear, this past life will appear like a dream, and one will just let the afflictions control one. One is controlled by the afflictions. And as a result of this karma, the suffering is even more intense, actually. It is said that the suffering is then actually 7 times more intense, even more powerful and intense than the suffering we experience now. So now we have a body, and having pain on the body is a great suffering. And then later, however, when the body dies, the suffering that we experience thereafter is even greater. So when the cause, the seed of the hell realm, hatred, remains within the mind after the body has died, it will ripen until that cause has come to an end. And it will continue to ripen into an endless experience of suffering until that cause comes to an end, an actual experience of suffering. So now in this lifetime, it might appear to somebody who doesn't practice that this life is real, and then they perceive a dream, for example, as unreal, empty, nothing. And so therefore, because they see a dream or even the lower realms just like a dream, just like mind, they do not pay any attention to their afflictions that always arise. And if they do not pay attention to the afflictions, they justify them, and when anger arises or jealousy arises, they just let it arise and give way to the affliction. And if they do so, they accumulate karma and have no awareness of that at all. They do not keep even track of all the negative things they do, the afflictions that arise. But the affliction remains within the mind, which is the one who creates this negative karma. And the affliction remains there like a seed that is carried together with the mind later on. And then later on, when the right conditions meet, that seed will ripen into a flower. And then as a result of hatred, for example, it ripens as the hell realm, or as a result of greed as a hungry spirit, or as a result of ignorance as an animal. And then each of these afflictions also is combined with each other. So it ripens into great suffering. So on the causal level, we are introduced to karma, cause and effect, the infallibility of karma. And then also, in contrast, we say appearances are one's own mind. So, however, although appearances are one's own mind, since karma is infallible, hatred will always lead to the appearance of the hell realm. Unchangingly, this is how it will be. So it will be good to understand that, because often people ask about that. And so I'm not a great scholar, but I have really thought about karma and have some understanding about it. And perhaps there are some things that I do not know, and in that case you can also clarify with the Khenpo and the lamas here, who also know the language. So this is a very important point to understand. It is important to really clearly discern between the qualities of seeing things like as an illusion, as they really are, and the faults of grasping at things.
나다 랑게 저다 나와다 랑게 샘소 샘이 맞더라 샘들 뉴몬 바 쪽소 뉴몬 바 쪽들은 로아를 쪽소 로아를 쪽이 제다버서 이래지는 건도도 혼란나 양송도 그지 레쪽 말람 출판다스 말람 그 출판데 케메 말해서 디는 말람을 주는 오 말람레스 말람데 가리게 송고요리는 소소라는 게 이게 단디는 유모바 가리 속체가 뒤라오데 샤용거리 저는 단디인데 용이 증랑당 맞아봐 단디는 요바삼지 저거 나와서 맞아봐 다 개용서 나용이 들어서 같이 샘 가게 집어치는 때 강직용은 정상 집어치는 라미기 정상 집어를 맞아 봐. 정상 차 망보려 때 단디 체라서 정상 차용을 걸어서 단디지 요리들이 제가 되는 뭐 바쪽지 나와지 레토 만남 쳐반다서 그 출속이 레토도 무슨 요발이지 그 출발해서 출발나 가지 출발해서 사제기 송니 로아 렉노를 동에나 봐 줘요 아스 티 라랑 게는 거 출발해서 가래서는 출발이들 빼잖아 너는 초장마 폴강야 너는 로아르도 소소니 투메레 용을 때나 라게 들들은 통구요리지 쳐대 코랑을 내상 박자게 코랑을 내지로 내지 저시네 라게 들들은 통구리 쳐나 통 들들가 돕다니 봐 차상 쳐대를 요리지 라게 들들 가까이 와 말이지 마당 또로게 대답 소나면 쳐라 통 다진 통도로와 투제로와 다 들리진 통구요리지 이게 나가 연이체 용리는 낙타는 통구요리지 다 동놈만 다 루아 좁아 다 들리진 통구요리지 야가 그 셈지는 다 토르마 잠지더니 색을 토주를 통구요리지 rinpachi도 소속은 통설 때 따뜻강에 따라하는 건 유무 bakare 촉자 뒤 레그 카도르디 베르다 당고 소매지는 저바가 나사오나 동가보디는 새로운 통요리지 촉철들이 협도 싸움 것은 니 산지 가는니 오 따라하는 저바리 때문에 저바상지 랑은 나가는 초용 거리지 저기도 나디 저기도 유무 비기세네 다 초용 거리지 얘를 따단 쳐봐야 치워서 강리 저랭이도 코 토마미 바니 루창미 발랑 티끌라 랭이 바사사 약바 대라 또 기동극도 좀 동제는 chen 된 레버도 나타다 동에서 다 무슨 연구를 된 쳐봐야는 쳐봐야도 무엇이요 고도요 말이지 고도면 바다 강리 다다를 내나 박차도 마토거든 첫째 때송은 그 과절 빼야 보여리 다다 레종만 들반자서 첫째 때다 제나 다 로르도 소수 내랑 박차거든 첫째거든 통도 쪽 자기요래서
So also saying that appearances are one's own mind, then according to that, since appearances are one's own mind, whichever of the 6 afflictions is the strongest, that creates the perception of the 6 realms of samsara, which is also the appearance, which is one's own mind. So the Samantabhadra prayer says that the beings of the 6 realms are deluded by like a dreamlike dreamlike delusion. So their delusion is not any different than a dream. So how is it like a dream? How are those perceptions really one's own mind? First, on the basis, there is self-grasping, and from self-grasping, then the other afflictions arise, and whichever of the affliction is the strongest, that will be directly reflected. So the appearance is the reflection of the affliction in the mind. When there is self-grasping, as long as there is self-grasping, one is never separated from fear. As long as there is self-grasping, there will always be fearful perceptions, fearful appearances. We think, what will happen to me? We are always afraid that something is going to happen. And we encounter many difficulties, and we are caught in fear and panic all the time. So anything that arises becomes frightening. So the stronger self-grasping, the more fear will appear to the mind. So whenever self-grasping is present, the 6 afflictions naturally arise. And just like a dream, the perceptions of the 6 afflictions, like a dream, are a deluded perception, like a dream. And so it is an actual experience resulting from one's karma, but it is a confused or deluded appearance, perception. And so the Buddha had said that the 6 realms, the beings in the 6 realms of samsara, experience 6 types of suffering depending on their karma, and depending on their affliction. And the delusion is the self-perception, the reflection of that being's karma. That is the deluded perception. For example, if you have a cup of pure water, then each of the beings in the 6 realms would see it differently. It's still the same cup of water. For example, a god will see that as nectar. The god sees the water as nectar due to the god's a particular individual karmic imprints that lead to the perception of nectar. And because the god perceives it as nectar, it actually has all the powers and qualities of nectar. And in reality, the god's nectar is still not separate from the cup of water. There's no other nectar of the gods than that cup of water. And then viewed from the perspective of an animal or a human, the water is something that we drink or we can wash ourselves with. And from the perspective of a hungry spirit, that same water is a liquid of blood and pus. It is defiled and it is indigestible. One doesn't want to drink it. And from the perspective of a hell being, the moment they come into contact with that cup of water, they see it as molten iron, and it has that same quality then. So depending on which of the affliction is the strongest, that karmic imprint will lead to different perceptions of the same thing, like the cup of water. Or, for example, it is like seeing a white conch shell as yellow for somebody who has the sickness jaundice. They see it is the same conch, but they see it in a different way. So that is what the Buddha means with one's own perceptions are deluded perceptions. Or also Milarepa said, the delusions that appear before you are the deluded appearances of your own mind. And so the reason why the mind is deluded is because there is self-grasping and afflicted states of mind. That leads to deluded perception. So the cause are the negative karmas, the obscurations, the negative deeds that we have accumulated since beginningless time in samsara. Since beginningless time, we have taken on countless bodies and have accumulated much negative karma. So that is the cause. The condition is the evil spirits, the hindrances, the obstacles. And the result is suffering, illness, and so forth, as an actual experience. And once that ripens, the experience of suffering ripens, then there's nothing that we can do about it, because it is the natural reflection of our own karmic imprints. And for as long as these karmic imprints are present, these kind of suffering perceptions will continue to manifest. So that is really important to understand. And so this is what is meant with saying that the karmic perceptions are a delusion, like a dream. So that is explained, for example, by looking at one cup of water. The beings in the 6 realms will see that same cup in 6 different ways.
Lamgabi, the child cheese, Tata Taylor, or so Mambo Yuri, Lamga Inca, Mars Army, touching Bossard was a church was the Lamga Hajang was a kiss on Timo, Hajang to try her so. Then it is a sometimes Kani Lamga, Lamgabi, Kabotani, now at the shell, Lamga shell. More than sort more than that, Chulapachi on Sari, Chola, Shakti Lopos and Ramas and Lakanduti. The younger Pala Kongi Chibotuan, Chine, Palakin, Cherang, the Langato Pasan Trace on this, or the Trace on Montes. Oh, that chance in your touching was Shasson is. What Shasson is? That's it. But he the Chibari, Ginger Tati. Now, number Dandi the only Nachi Chongro, some of the Bakchadi or it. There are things that truth is the 대양 자당지기 주 람이 맞춰서 박차 잘 무슨 특히 뭐 여전히 레지 용으로 용의 집 박차지기 다 양장양들이 뭐라면 뭐니 다보 가르쳐 람과로 주고 당가들은 람과도 보면 로 상고 요리지 이 상고 제그 람과도 고 생태가 조 요리지 독보 민로 sab들이 람과도 조 요리 뭐람 탐지더니 뭐를 독 탐지 대답을 듣고 랑기더니 다딩이 정랑 조록 대답을 뭐람 그 랑기 생긴랑 데리더니 바로 박차들이 조 요리지 데리더니 자자상 무슨 뭐람 같이 뭐람 거니 다 라한데 잠을 통도 시기요리 대탐지 결령이서 되럽대 저 뉴모 바기 대대 잠을 자라 들이다다 다 같이 박차 있잖아 들이 민족 박차나 민족박 코는 잠을 통고 용식적인 통고 말이야 어때는 초화동에 골뚝받치 장용들이 고라시 자야 되라서 고체기요리 천랑도 오마지나 야와 대답을 한 것은 저는 살도 요리 대디 대답 시당지 탐지 냠지잖아 그리고도 대답은 저는 잘 드리고 대마다고 접도 요리 드리 지금 매열라 다다 레장이 이사는 대답을 터블 대답지 영다 싸움은 오 다음에 생고 박차고 저도 제가 나와다 랑그 샘는 뉴모 멋진 레티 되어서 사전 레버티 그때 다다 대답을 로아르도 소소 다찬도 선 디고 아담 차나 들이 다디 제들이 심리 돈에 주변 다다 자지 다 종킹이 주의자분이 띵지 감담게 말함도 찍과리지 다다 송불감이 지금 뭐야 내가 딘딘다고 와서 네 마다버 퇴근하는 소는 들이 사건 노 기버 또 데라서 탐지 마다버 거는 디제람지 마다바 소나 제 마다바 차송탄 들이 산이 제소마 박차니 다른 거 단지 맞아 나들 야지 박차에 크는 거요리 제가 말함 그 감에 들이 랑그 생고 느끼니가 저는 마치게들이 그런 게 다른 쪽으로 비지답은 초초 대답을 레서 하고는 들이들이 생리 돈을 좀 받아서 잘되나 데라틴들이 말하리 밖에 취재자 맞주지 생고자와 조지 생고자와 당연히 생고 이제 소지 하고서 저는 생고 이제 소그 딱 강의들 딱 내방가 마음과 맞지 되니 반이 다 심사도 남카다ವೆ 나 딱치니 쪽으로 잡아 당부 대 하고는 오 따디 젬바디 띵이 돈담 젬바 주라미 바스 그도 주마타버스 그도 추탐지 주제라 주마타 바장장르 디 돈담고 젬바도 보절매 바스 돈담고 젬바들 들이 이만큼 건드상 보소 사막 도지 장소 건드상 보지는 가리 지 생각 내려오세라고 또 손에 가지나 정보리 가지를 제보리 달롱도 와가 저는 건드상 보고 제주 쪽도 용디 쪽 요거요래 도지 장르이나 등송 양용디들이 좋고요래 제 참아 생각 원래 창요래 용디 제다가 창요래 동문에 강이 맞지도 않는 줄아 다 시바싸고 나도 탐지도 잡아 대하고는 들들 이시지 맨칼이 다다가 남시대 고밥 생기다 남시지 고밥들은 남시지 등호 도선 이시지 임바지다 하자도 타용 차와 타용도 깝들은 통통을 내서 못 봤다지 내가 뭐 통했더니 통좋아지 그냥 문지 덮고 다 덮고요 말이 이렇게 문지 벌써 말들이 양당양도 곰나 이렇게 공송은 내 살들이 이거는 내도 봐 차용 거를 신내지 랑송 대내는 다들 20m 중요해서 전부 매소 양양 줘서 다디 다와디도 대상 오시서는 되게 곰니다 진시 전장은 다 줘봐 다와지 다디 도송은 다와지 시랍 대미 총총 따르지 이시 메다 총을 진배 메소 양도 진이나 남도 가능성이 뒤가면 진이 시합들이 진이나 남도디 비누 가양 매바 맨노도 동바 차로 변의 제당은 제당 민주가 남도 총총 다 몰래다고 가려 좋고요. 들이 광송을 들이 남도 니몽 대서라 과양 좋다고요. 마음 남도 총총 좋다고 공 남도 치고 좀 못해봤대 마음 배종을 제 미에다버디 진시견도 보바지 진시견도 진시대 남도 보신다를 했지 이 시랍디 미에다 내가 사온다를 해서 데리들 진시기 준장고서 그러더니 따다다 세미 돈에 좀 타다 대니신의 종진지만 남들 스종을 열라 남들 배생기 다 남도 샤롱하대 이러면 자세라니 시랍라티니 다리 차원 남도데 시랍 뜻이송나 오 대바야 만지 바야 만지 라지 초당 랍다 담이 고로레스 들리니 바요레스 대미송나 다 동답다 준비 동반이 그것도 준비해서 마음에 받은 로아를 놓는 차용구요리 동답문이 저 마저티 소속에 남도디 좋다가 마저 가다라는 경우니 따고요. 대리지도 좋네. 들이대가라 독진 없고 제법감이야. 뭐라 토도 대봐. 타지 토도 제봐 라오리스. 등 조소도 자와디 갖고 요리 있어. something. Don't also the Java Sudan was the Yamiche Tokyo Mari, the very three coming check your Tawashibatan with any Mocho Maret.
And so through our dreams, we can see the way in which we are deluded. So on the basis, we are deluded because of self-grasping. So with that, I have a personal experience from when I was young, when I was a child, that really clarified that for me. So during those days in Tibet, the roads are very bad, and when we were riding on a horseback on those roads, along those roads, there was always a great danger because those roads were narrow and you could fall over the cliff, and there was a great river below. So I was always really afraid of these narrow, dangerous roads when riding on a horseback. And so then sometimes that would appear to me also in the dreams, that I was traveling on that road, and it was frightening. I felt that there might be some danger coming. So because of that, I actually requested some divination from some lamas, and some of them would say that maybe it means that there is an obstacle and you should do certain pujas. But then I also asked my father, who really has great qualities, and so then after telling this story to my father of my dream experiences, my father asked me, so have you ever been on such a terrifying road? And I said yes. And so when you were on that road in real life, did you feel afraid? And I said yes. So it is just like making a picture. The moment you are afraid, it is like making a picture with the camera. You are afraid because you grasp at a self. You wonder, what will happen to me? And that is what places an imprint into the mind. And then when various conditions arise, this imprint will become activated, and you will always have this perception of this dangerous, terrifying road. And so, for example, in a dream, due to this imprint of this terrifying road, I'm traveling on this road in a dream, and it's not terrifying, but because I have this imprint of terrifying road, I'm thinking that, or maybe it will turn into a terrifying road. And then because I'm thinking that, the road becomes terrifying. So the terrifying road is really created by my own mind. And so in a similar way, all the appearances of the 6 realms are created in that way through the imprints within the mind that appear just like in our dreams. So the way we place those imprints into the mind is due to self-grasping. Because there is self-grasping, we are always afraid. And when fear arises, we have created an imprint that will later become alive. And so other people also have shared similar experiences. For example, people say sometimes that they have dreams of like spirits or gods and demons and so on. So it is, first of all, due to the cause of karma, obscurations, negative deeds, that the cause, the affliction, will manifest in various different ways. For example, a crazy person, a mad person, what they experience is also the arising of their imprints. And nobody else can see what they are seeing, only they can see it. But to them, it is a real perception, a real experience of suffering. And often it even drives them to commit suicide because they do not recognize that as a delusion. So not recognizing these perceptions as delusion, as the confused states of mind, then as a result of anger, for example, the hell will become manifest. And then all the beings that have accumulated anger or hatred meet together in hell, and to them the hell realm appears, as though it would really exist, like a real experience. And similarly, in the human world, we experience both happiness and suffering, and so that also is a creation of our own mind, the imprints of our own mind becoming reflected. So appearances are one's own mind, as it says here in the verse. First, afflictions arise, then we commit an action, karma, and as a result, the 6 realms manifest. So then it says, so if one understands that, it says, from the beginning, mind's nature is free from the extremes of elaboration. So that is to understand that the universe that is created exists just like a dream. There's no difference. While we are alive in this world, in this human world, we perceive that as our reality. We hold that to be true. But in the various scriptures or teachings, it clearly explains to us that also these perceptions of this life are impermanent. For example, it says our wealth, our friends, it all is impermanent. It all is a compound and therefore impermanent. And the imprint that is placed into our mind on the basis of these impressions in this life will remain within the mind, and for as long as we do not separate from self-grasping, we will continue to bring these imprints with us. So, as I mentioned before, for example, when we are dreaming, the mind in the dream creates an entire world system and sentient beings. That is a deluded perception. So this is how delusion arises. This is how we are deluded. And so it says, so the mind is free from the extremes of elaboration from the beginning. So Milarepa had said, you should not inquire into the root of all phenomena, but rather inquire into the root of the mind itself. Because what happens when you realize the natural state of the mind? When you meditate, for example, there will be a time when past thoughts, all the thoughts have stopped, and the future thoughts have not arisen. And so there will be a time where you will gaze in between this space of past and future thoughts. And that space is that union of clarity and emptiness, space-like by nature, that is free from the faults of eternalism and nihilism. So that is what you should first understand. And then also, that is the ultimate truth. And the ultimate truth is unchanging. The conventional truth is illusory. All phenomena that appear are compounds and therefore impermanent. But the ultimate truth is unchanging. And it is represented in the Nyingma tradition as Samantabhadra, or in the new tantric system as Vajradhara. Samantabhadra, it literally means the all good one. So that is also the nature of the mind. When you look at your mind and you see the actual nature of the mind, it is always good, it is always happy. So in the various scriptures, Samantabhadra's qualities are explained, and so there are 6 qualities of Samantabhadra. And Vajradhara, there are 7 limbs of Vajradhara, so 7 qualities. And so all those qualities are actually complete within the nature of your own mind. When the mind is clear and you're free of all thoughts, then you rest within primordial awareness, primordial wisdom. So the mind of sentient beings, for the time being, is ordinary consciousness that discriminates various objects. But when you realize the nature of this consciousness, itself is primordial wisdom. And wisdom, this primordial wisdom, is extremely subtle and profound. And sometimes in the beginning, practitioners gain a very brief, short glimpse of this nature. But then they cannot actually sustain, they cannot actually grasp and sustain this nature. And so for this reason, we need to habituate meditation again and again until we are able to abide. And so therefore we practice shamatha and vipassana. It is said in the beginning, wisdom is like a small fire spark, like a small fire flame. Therefore, you should nurture this small spark of fire again and again with mindfulness. Once you have recognized the nature of mind, it needs to be sustained with mindfulness. And so at present, this mindfulness, which is wisdom, is like a small fire flame. And as you continue to habituate to it, it increases. So we increase the wisdom fire by recognizing each and every thought, everything that arises and appears. And if you recognize all the thoughts that arise, then they will not affect you in one or the other way. They will just become emptiness. For example, when anger arises, it will disappear. So in the beginning, for beginning practitioners, we first must, however, habituate to recognizing the smaller, less intense thoughts. And once you have grown used to that, then you might be able to also overcome the stronger, the more powerful thoughts and transform them into wisdom. Of course, if you do not always meditate and habituate, then you will not be able to overcome the thoughts that arise. So if you do not pay attention to always recognize all those little thoughts that arise, then later, when a real intense thought arises, then clearly you will not be able to liberate it. And the fault of that, the reason why you are unable to liberate it, is because you have not habituated through sustaining mindfulness. So mindfulness is like a fire, and the thoughts, the afflictions are like wood. And therefore, in order to turn them into fire, you must sustain mindfulness all the time. And so therefore here it says in the same verse, knowing this, not to engage the mind in subject-object duality is the Bodhisattva's practice. So this subject-object duality, and engaging in that, is when the inner grasping mind meets the outer object and grasps at the object. So when the mind grasps at the object, thoughts appear in relation to it. And then we hold them to be true. If you sustain mindfulness, you will recognize the thoughts that arise. And recognizing thoughts, you will let them be as they are. You will not think they're true, nor will you think they're untrue. they will leave on their own accord naturally, just like a wave arises and disappears on the water. So that is the power of mindfulness. So on the conventional level, again, karma is infallible, and if karma is created, the 6 realms of samsara manifest. And on the ultimate level, the karmic causes, the afflictions, are empty, can become liberated. And so that is within one's own hands, whether or not one liberates the thoughts, the afflictions that arise. So that is something that one needs to resolve for oneself. And when we are introduced to Dzogchen, for example, we say that first you're introduced to mindfulness, your awareness, Rigpa. So that, and then then Rigpa increases. So these two are still rather easy to accomplish. You can recognize it and increase it. But then the third step is to gain like a certainty, a depth of Rigpa that naturally liberates the thoughts that arise. And so that is difficult to accomplish, to gain this certainty, this confidence in liberating all the thoughts that arise. So unless we have developed this view through sustaining mindfulness, it will be difficult to liberate the thoughts.
드린 참선을 드린 암지 그 과 차야 요래 영소는 참선 때 차용 로마다 비상이가 말이 참선을 암지 그들이 사방고 동성 선조고 요래 된도한테 은혜 뒤감이 용기 강양 뭐야 때 맞아버리냐 태도면 대리 삼리들이 은혜 차야 요래 내가서 로마 찍을 뒤성 은혜 인절로 말해 로마 찍도 코 나와 매지 공나마 매지 줄 대바 빼요 남부 대빼 로그인스 고바인스 곰들 가리다들 왜 기본도 다티 기본들 지라지 이시 재민인데도 매들이 곰들 참들 대번들이 시축생라도 계속 다티 대리에서 센터 조성 들 대통 줄이면 그 여러 생각도 어떻게 대리 제가 똑같이 먹었으나 기차 봐서 이제 여기서 먹었으나 저는 집 봐서 지양하면 산쪽선을 공비우나 되는 메시지라 이 가양 마트에는 제가 공야를 제가 다 뒤감이 되는 거면 다 들어 뒤따와 되우나 들이 들이 남도 강사 담지讨论出来就完了。少做每次关键是别的有个有的，这那多我那这个识都会有的，这种来的应该结果嘛的，在那主干都找完说，然后打完了他就呢，这里我们家没搞，主干都找完才有的次。在那那么多人怎么买有的，那么多人民，那么多钱用啊，吃到那边在那找有的，那么多钱个的，现在这里吃那边没有的次。저를 못지 받아 밑으로 요리지 다 좋다 테마 하고 다 되리지 이 감리들이 나도 미소들이 로직지 들이 전이 세미네로게 사통 남과다 윤내나 다 산지 심지 찍리 다 예적지 바디 책대 당은에 상태 하고 듣고 요리 저 로직 어디 예미 이 감리들은 곰이 곰고 왔더니 자연고 요리 네 곰무가 자기 가르쳐 말하리 바가서는 대라 곰이를 라고 망보 이어야지 곰이 되는 다송도 곰이 내고서 곰도 먹고 들인지 이러면 봐 이속어서 저기 반영지 밤이도 곰도 받을 때 곰 먹고 봐도 곰 또안 먹고 봐서 거요 말하리 바게 송나더니 남도 이 시행 보진소 그때서 라고요 강이 남도 강찰 남도 강찰로 뒤감니 남도 때 레지 14시 어때 냠도 제요 제요 제게더니 14시 저랑 사정들이 뭐 тор떡고요 그래서 다다디 독에 가리는 tor떡게 될 때는 tor고요 그 무슨 냠이기라 동인을 줘나 유모벌을 tor떡거리 내와를 tor고요 탐질 tor고요 기독교가 제매봐 연구시 대화야 남도리 동인야 남도리 제 탐질 tor떡은 되는 번절 매번 대화 침보서
So having recognized the view, then that view needs to be habituated through meditation. According to the Kagyu lineage, you practice meditation following the 4 yogas. The first one is called single-pointedness. So first you have recognized the view and have recognized that the view is that non-dual primordial wisdom, the natural state of the mind. So you've recognized it, and that has liberated you from all the doubts. You have resolved that that is the nature of the mind. Like in the Samantabhadra prayer, it says samsara and nirvana have a single basis. So that single basis is this non-dual primordial wisdom. And within that, all appearances of samsara and nirvana are included. So because we grasp it as self, sometimes it appears to us that we are very small. The mind is very small and limited. And we think that because we grasp at a self, but that is not the reality. When you actually see the nature of the mind actually is not small at all. It is very vast. It pervades everywhere where space pervades. And within space, anything can fit. All phenomena of samsara and nirvana can fit in space, because space is endless, without any center or boundary. When we practice Mahamudra, it is said the actual nature of the mind is like space. Mind and space are the same. And the mind is not an object of investigation. It is just like trying to investigate space. For example, if you try to find out where is the center of space, where are the limits of space, you cannot come up with an answer to that. You cannot investigate space. But still, you cannot deny that there is space. There is still space. And so therefore, Milarepa has said, the mind and space are not any different. So first you recognize this. In the beginning, the first step, it is called single-pointedness. And then that recognition needs to be habituated. You always need to abide within that recognition. And so that leads to the second yoga, which is free from elaboration. And so then by abiding within this nature, you recognize that there is nothing in samsara and nirvana, there's nothing that you can find at all that possesses any true existence. The nature of the mind is beyond existence and non-existence. There's nothing true to be found, nothing really existing to be found. So that it is not an object that can be elaborated upon. It cannot be determined. So it is free from elaboration. Normally we grasp at an existence. We try to resolve something in terms of its existence. But when you really look at it, there's not even the slightest particle that you can show. The nature of the mind is like space. There's nothing to find there. So it is free from any elaboration. But also it is not non-existent because there is clear awareness, luminosity. So free from elaboration also means that the mind is free from the faults of eternalism and nihilism. It transcends the intellect, and that means that you cannot determine it by means of conventions. You cannot say it is this. You cannot give it a name, actually. It is something that you can only understand for yourself through your own personal experience of the nature of the mind. So therefore we call it the self-knowing primordial wisdom. Ultimately, that is something you can only know and experience yourself, and nobody can actually show it to you. Nobody can actually explain it to you with words. The words can only indicate or point at it, give you a vague understanding of it. Or for example, this is how it is explained in the Dzogchen practice. It is the nature of the mind is like space. And when you point your finger at it, it is only at the direction, like a sign, an indication, this is how it is. But this is not what it really all is. It is something that you can only resolve through your own personal knowledge, your own experience. So Milarepa therefore also said that you yourself must cut through the imputing a reality to things that do not really exist. You must resolve that on your own. And so in the beginning we need to cultivate trust in karma and compassion for sentient beings and single-pointed devotion to the Guru. But all of that only points to an understanding of the nature of the mind. You can really only understand it through inquiring into it yourself, by abiding within the luminosity of the mind itself. So when you abide within this nature, sometimes it just comes to you naturally. You just naturally know. And this is also according to my own experience, and also my disciples experience. So therefore, you should not lose heart when it comes to recognizing the nature of the mind. Sometimes when you meditate, just naturally on its own, the mind is completely clear and empty, and then you just know that this is what it is. So this is how people like myself who do not have much learning can understand it. So at that moment you just have no doubt, you just know that this is it, and this is the only way of really understanding, really knowing the nature of the mind. For example, I had a disciple in England who actually is not a Buddhist, but he's interested and he likes Buddhism, and so he said that I'm actually not a Buddhist, but I like to read this Buddhist book, and I also like meditation. And when I read this booklet on meditation, I just felt happy for no reason. There was just no special trust or anything that arose. I just felt happy. And in that moment, I just had this feeling of this is it. And there was no doubt in my mind. So he asked me, is that what it is? And I said, this is exactly what it is. So in the Dzogchen, there is reference to somebody who instantaneously realizes. But actually, Jigten Sumgön said, and even those who instantaneously realize in this life have already habituated in past lives. So they also have trained gradually. And now, as a result, in this life, they can quickly understand. And so if you have the view, if you sustain the view, whatever thought arises will melt just like ice melting into water, or just like a pile of grass being burned by fire. And there's nothing else that you need to do to it. It is only to sustain this unelaborated view as the thought arises, and it will go on its own accord. There's nothing that needs to be done. So that is this yoga of free from elaboration. So you first recognize the view, you meditate, you habituate it, and you come to a state that is free from elaboration. And that is when you do not grasp at any thought that arises. But still, thoughts will arise, but you will not grasp at them. And so they will appear just like a wave on water, and then disappear on their own accord, just like a wave. Or just like drawing an image onto water, disappearing on its own. So when that happens, that is a sign that you are holding the genuine, the authentic view. And so then the third yoga is called single taste. So that is when you always abide within this union of clarity and emptiness. You recognize what was meant by this term, Buddhas and sentient beings have a single basis. Then this understanding will appear to you, will dawn to you as a realization. This is how it really is. You will understand what that actually means, the single basis. You will understand the union of samsara and nirvana. And then the fourth yoga is called non-meditation. Then there is no more need to meditate. As Milarepa also had said, there are different levels of meditation, like higher and lower levels of non-meditation. And so non-meditation in brief, however, means that there's an ongoing state, day and night, of meditation. You always rest inseparable from the clear light, the luminosity of your mind, also throughout your sleep, an ongoing state. And as it is ongoing, it is effortless. No effort is required. So Milarepa said that is the then at that time one's thoughts become the essence of primordial wisdom. So that is when a thought then arises, it always arises within clear awareness. So you hold clear awareness, and by just holding clear awareness, the thought becomes self-liberated. And likewise, all suffering becomes self-liberated. So if you truly engage in practice, you will be able to liberate suffering, liberate thoughts, afflictions, liberate happiness. Also that need to be liberated. Because ultimately we need to realize that happiness and suffering are the same. There's no difference. Because happiness is just a thought, and suffering is also just a thought that you all need to let go of. And when all those thoughts dissolve, then you merge in a state of unchanging great bliss.